Welcome back, everyone. On the last episode, Commander Warden Vance and the crew of the Beetle 68 completed a historic FTL jump to Alpha Centauri, only to find that their arrival was a death sentence for the locals. On the emerald world of Cen-Prime, they learned that their advanced technology creates a noise that attracts the Sky Eaters, grotesque, predatory hunters that serve as the universe's immune system. After a desperate battle left the village infected with a predatory genetic spore, the crew was forced to retreat to orbit, realizing they were a beacon for the very monsters they were fighting. But the mystery deepened when they discovered a massive, almost 7,000-year-old derelict mothership of unknown origin, drifting in the Cen-Prime's lunar shadow. It's a brutalist titan that looks terrifyingly similar to human design, suggesting we aren't the first to make this great leap. The Beetle drifts silently toward this ancient ghost to find out if we are following in the footsteps of a forgotten graveyard. And now, let's continue the Beetle 68 cruise journey. Look at the bridge section, Kalen pointed out, his voice a mere breath. It's been vented. The atmospheric seals didn't fail. They were ripped open from the outside and inside at the same time. We drifted alongside the ancient hull, our ship looking like a parasite next to a whale. The orange industrial lights of our cockpit and the searchlights at the front outer hull reflected off the pitted, dark metal of the Titan. Through the 360 feed, I could see the great tear the Elder had spoken of, not a hole in the sky, but a massive breach in the mothership's engine housing, most likely its FTL core. It's like looking at something that ceased to exist thousands of years ago, yet looks and feels so familiar, Lyra whispered, her hand tightening on the throttle. As if it is us, 7,000 years ago, or 7,000 years from now. We're here, I said, watching the docking clamps of the ancient giant loom over us. Kalen, get the translation device ready. If there's any data left in that ghost's core, I want it. We're going to find out exactly what happened here. The storage bay of the Beetle 68 was a symphony of heavy metallic clicks and the high-pitched electric whine of coil guns cycling to life. This was no longer a scientific excursion. It had transformed into a tactical breach. We traded our light taser rifles for the USF's door kickers, high-velocity coil guns, and plasma slug shots designed to turn anything organic into gaping holes. We stood in the airlock, for armored silhouettes bathed in a red tactical glow in our Ragnarok battle armors, until the reinforced, double-layered outer door hissed open, venting the last of our recycled air into the silent tomb of the derelict. Step light. I ordered, my suit-mounted floodlights cutting a jagged, jittery path into the absolute dark. Tight formation. Shields up. As we drifted across the void toward the massive gash in the giant's hull, the sheer wrongness of the ship hit us. Up close, the material wasn't steel or titanium. It was a matte, slate-gray composite that seemed to swallow our light. Something far more advanced than anything the Venusian forges had ever pressed. Captain, Lyra's voice came through the private comms, tight and breathless as she maneuvered her thruster pack. Look at the superstructure. The way the bulkheads are angled, the triple redundant wiring looms. It's exactly how we're building the Dauntless back home. But this material, the building technique, and the sheer mass and size, it's definitely not from our Sol system, or the higher-ups keeping a Goliath-level tech fuck-up in tight-sealed secret. Lyra chuckled as Kalen chipped in, his own floodlights sweeping over a jagged breach that looked like it had been punched through by a mountain. It's a paradox. The architecture is Terran relative, but the technology is millennia ahead of our great technological leap. If we didn't build this, who did? And why did they use our blueprints 7,000 years before we drew them? Silas muttered a grim response, his slugshot held ready across his chest. Maybe we didn't draw them first. Maybe we're just repeating a signal we didn't invent, Silas retorts, as Kalen looked back at Silas with an expressionless gaze. We crossed the threshold of the giant gash. The damage looks like a supermassive FTL core imploding in on itself, made my spine shudder just by the thought. Our magnetic boots clacking onto the ancient deck plating. The interior was a cavern of frozen shadow where floating debris, crystallized coolant, shattered glass, and unidentifiable husks drifted in the eerie zero-G. Lyra, stay on my 6, I said, my pulse drumming in my ears. If something big enough to kill a titan like this is still out here, then the Beetle is nothing but a tin can in a storm. We find the black box, the data core, or whatever passes for a memory for a species 1,000 years ahead of us. Should be easy, right? We need to know if this was a colony ship, or just a tomb for something or someone long forgotten. Her light drifted across a row of cryopods lining the corridor. Every single one was torn open from the inside. Lyra's voice dropped to a whisper. If this ship is safe, why does it feel like we're walking into the mouth of something that already swallowed the crew? The team moved deeper, navigating through the jagged ruins of the derelict. The entry point was a nightmare of twisted geometry where the FTL core had most likely imploded, folding the ship's internal decks like paper. Huge slabs of that slate-gray composite hung suspended in the zero-G, some glowing with a faint, dying radiation that hummed in their teeth. "Watch your tether," the captain warned, his light hitting a drop-off where the floor simply vanished into a vertical abyss. The structural integrity here is a suggestion at best. One wrong step and you're falling into a hole that doesn't have a bottom. They reached a junction where the corridor split into 3 deep levels. To their left, a massive section of the ship had been crushed into a lightless squeeze. The shadows there were so thick that even their high-intensity floodlights seemed to die a few feet past the threshold. "We can't go in there," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a cautious whisper. He panned his light across the gap, revealing jagged, tooth-like metal beams dripping with frozen, black coolant. The sensors are showing micro-fractures in the bulkhead. If we even graze those walls, the whole section is going to pancake. It's a death trap even in low gravity. Silas peered into the gloom of the crushed deck, his helmet light catching the glint of thousands of frost-covered wires hanging like web silk. "Look at the way the debris is floating. It's moving in a circle. There's still some kind of localized gravity well in there, probably a remnant of the core implosion. If we get sucked in, we aren't coming back out." Kalen pulled a handheld graviton from his utility belt, the device's screen casting a flickering blue light onto his visor. He tapped the calibration sensor, and a chaotic web of red lines began to spider across the holographic display. "It's a mess. The gravity is fluctuating between 0.02 G and 0.05 G every few seconds. It's not just low, it's off-balanced. The ship's internal mass keeps shifting. Cap, this is one ultra-freaky ship," Kalen muttered, his voice slightly cracking. Then Lyra checked her navigation HUD, her breathing sounding heavy in the quiet of the suit. "Captain, the blueprints I'm extrapolating, they don't make sense. The command deck should be another half-mile up, but the internal layout is really disorienting. I checked the charge on my coil gun, the clicks sounding too loud in the dead air. Stay alert, squad. Doc and Kalen, watch the vents. If anything moves that isn't us, don't wait for a scan. Punch the trigger. We are not making another Cen-Prime mistake here." We moved deeper, step by step, into the throat of the ghost ship, toward the bridge, the only place left where the end of this story might still be screaming in the dark. 20 minutes into the throat of this giant, I had lost all sense of direction. The scale of the ship was wrong. It was a massive architectural prowess of dead technology. We might be able to salvage some tech upgrades if they survive this long. If their power systems are compatible, the Beetle could use a boost. I told the team, my voice sounding with the thinning doubtfulness in the comms. We finally reached the bridge. It was a massive, circular amphitheater of haptic consoles and dead screens. I ordered Kalen and Lyra to stay behind and try to wake up anyone in the process, and to find the black box or anything that can tell us why this 7,000-year-old Pandora's box was drifting in the dark. Doc and I pushed into the auxiliary rooms to set up a perimeter, and we moved deeper into the side corridors, setting up the perimeter. As we were placing the portable auto turrets, suddenly something happened. A groan. It wasn't metal on metal or the ship settling. It was a deep, harmonic, soul-wrenching vibration that felt like it was coming from a throat a mile wide. "High alert," I barked. "Lyra, Kalen, hurry it up. We don't have time for a clean translation. Grab whatever you can and let's move." Kalen's voice crackled back, frantic, stating that the text was shifting. It wasn't just ancient, it was a warning system trying to signal a breach. He was cut off by the scream of my own drone's proximity alarm. Silas and I rounded the corner into the med bay, and our floodlights hit a conjoint, pulsing, bulging mass of flesh of what used to be a crew. It is now over 7,000 years later, yet the flesh looked like it had been formed an hour ago, raw, wet, and glistening with that same crimson, infectious, sickly green sheen we saw on the planet. They were fused together, a tangled knot of limbs and torsos that shouldn't be alive. "It's moving toward the heat," Doc yelled, turning his plasma shotgun from his shoulder towards the creature. "I think it's the thermal signature from our suits. Captain, we're waking it up." I didn't wait for the entity to move. Instead, I let the coil gun scream. The magnetic rails hissed as they punched fist-sized holes into the fleshy mass, tearing through the mutated tissue. It didn't scream, it just vibrated, that same harmonic groan shaking my teeth. It wasn't hard to kill, but as the mass slumped, the shadows in the vents started to shift. Thousands of them, small, rotting, and hungry for the heat of our technology. Fall back to the bridge," I commanded, my boots sparking against the deck. "Lyra, Calen, tell me you have the data." Lyra screamed that the core was pulled, but then her voice turned to pure dread. "Captain, the Beetle, the auto-defense just went live." Outside the hull, I could hear the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the Beetle's 68's primary turrets. It wasn't shooting at the ship, it was shooting at the things crawling off the derelict and onto our hull. "They aren't just in the ship," Calen's voice was a whisper of pure horror. "They are the ship. Every circuit, every wire. It's been replaced by them." I gripped my weapon tighter. Run for the airlock. If they get a hold of the Beetle's FTL core, we are never going home." Movement in the upper vents caught Calen by surprise, his voice a panicked spike in the comms as he clutched the heavy alien box and the core log to his chest. He stayed shielded in the center of our diamond formation, his eyes darting between the overhead drone feed and the dark, rib-like corridors of the derelict. We were not just fighting monsters. Instead, we were fighting a choir of the damned. As we pushed toward the airlock, the shadows detached from the ceiling. They were towering figures, 7 or 8 feet of pale, yet wet, bloated, infected, open, wounded skins stretched over frames of too many limbs. They appeared as a conjoined mass of writhing flesh, with the faces of the ancient crew fused into their torsos, their mouths stretched wide in a perpetual, silent scream. The harmonic groan we had heard was not a growl, but the collective, vibrating agony of thousands of years of consciousness trapped in a biological nightmare. Silas yelled that they were still in there, his shots thundering as the recoil shook his armored frame while he blasted a hole through a reaching limb. He claimed that the groan was a plea rather than a language. I yelled at him to ignore the faces and focus the shots at center mass while I took the point. My coil gun hummed, sending a blur of magnetic slugs that shredded the front runner into a spray of gray, cold ichor. Lyra acted as a ghost of efficiency on my right, her rifle spitting light and dropping anything that twitched in our peripheral vision. She pointed out that the Beetle was screaming and directed my attention to the external feed. Through the 360-degree HUD, I saw the Beetle 68 sitting in the lunar shadow like a cornered beast. Her autocannons tracked in every direction. Her FTL core had now become a beacon for the creatures. Suddenly, the ship's primary weapon roared. It was a heavy-duty mass driver designed for clearing asteroids, but now it punched massive cauterized holes into the hull of the derelict just outside our airlock. The vibration of the shot traveled through the deck plates and nearly knocked Calen off his feet. The Beetle was trying to shake them off and clearing the porch for our arrival. I yelled that we had 50 meters to the gash and ordered Lyra and Silas to provide covering fire, warning Calen that he would stay here forever if he dropped that box. We burst through the final corridor, the airlock visible through the jagged breach, but the floor between us and the ship was carpeted in writhing, agonizing flesh. They were not just attacking. They were trying to weld themselves to our suits, to pull our heat into their cold, ancient hunger. On my command, I primed a thermal grenade to give us a momentary window. We leapt across the vacuum gap on my mark. As we hit the ramp, the Vanguard cannon fired again, the backblast nearly throwing us into the cargo hold. The airlock door slammed shut, the heavy double layers hissing as they sealed out the silence and the screams. I gasped and slammed my helmet against the bulkhead, ordering Lyra to get us out of there and burn the sublights regardless of the heat sink. I roared for Doc to manage the frontal emitters and for Lyra to keep the ship spinning, my voice straining against the G-force as the Beetle 68 became a whirlwind of kinetic energy and ionized fire. The tandem cockpit was a blur of warning strobes and tactical overlays. I overrode the safeties, mine and Lyra's hands fixated on the manual flight sticks as I slaved directly to the quad-aft thrusters. Every time a cluster of those fleshed husks tried to latch onto our ventral plating, Lyra kicked the lateral stabilizers, swinging the Beetle in a violent 360-degree death roll. The thruster plumes, burning at thousands of degrees, acted like a blowtorch to incinerate anything caught in the wake as they were shredded by centrifugal force. Doc Silas hunched over the auxiliary weapons console, his face illuminated by the rhythmic strobe of the Vanguard cannon. He was shearing the very hull of the derelict apart to keep our flight corridor open. He shouted that the frontal lasers were cycling and the auto cannons were at 90% heat capacity, lamenting that we were venting ammo faster than the loader could reload the ammo ports. In the cargo hold, I heard the metallic sound of Kalen desperately strapping the alien ledger and the humming engine core into a high-tension stowage rack. Once he confirmed they were locked down, I commanded him to get to the lower storage bay to access the high-yield nuclear payload. I told him that if those souls were trapped in that fleshy abominations, we were giving them the only peace left by putting the agonies to rest, and we couldn't leave such highly infectious vector in such high-risk zone like these. Kalen yelled back that it was a final option warhead, but scrambled toward the manual release anyway. I ordered him to set the timer for a proximity burst. Lyra executed a masterful burn to push us into a stable drift 3 kilometers out. From this distance, the ancient mothership looked like a jagged, rotting tooth in the dark. We could see thousands of the mutated crew crawling over the hull, their rotting forms shimmering in the light of the twin suns. Kalen's voice turned cold and professional as he confirmed the target was locked and the warhead was primed. I whispered for him to fire. The Beetle 68 shuddered as the ship's underbelly payload cannon thrummed. The warhead was a streak of silent white light against the black. We did not look. Even through the reinforced glass steel and the digital dimming of our HUDs, the flash was blinding. A miniature sun ignited in the shadow of the moon. The 7,000-year-old derelict then exploded and atomized. The harmonic groan of those abominations that had been vibrating in our teeth for the last hour snapped into absolute and crushing silence. The shockwave hit us seconds later, a hammer blow of radiation and kinetic force that would rattle every bolt in the frame. Lyra whispered that the ship was atomized and the noise had stopped. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding and leaned back into the pilot's seat with shaking hands. I ordered a check on the hull integrity and for Doc to scan for any hitchhikers that might have survived the blast. I told Kalen to start looking at that box. We needed to find out what, or whose, ship we had just blown up, and we frankly needed more information nonetheless. We were stuck in this system. We couldn't just go back either ways. I commanded Lyra to keep the sensors on a wide-angle sweep and maintain minimum thruster output. If anything had survived that nuclear blast or was still clinging to our hull plating, I want to know before it finds a way to event, I warned. My voice felt rasping against the internal calm as the bridge fell into a tense, expectant silence. She did not look away from the haptic glass, her fingers flicking through the 360-degree telemetry feeds. She reported that we were drifting at 0.05 meters per second with thermal dampers at maximum. While she scrubbed the hull with the short-range LiDAR, she noted, "The radiation from the warhead is making the sensors twitchy, though we appear to be clean for the moment." Turning my focus to the cargo hold, I ordered Kalen to handle the humming box that was vibrating in sync with our FTL core. I told him to strip the lead lining off the auxiliary batteries if necessary to get a localized shield around the research bay. If that pulse acted as a beacon, we were screaming our coordinates to every Sky Eater in the sector, and we needed to muffle it immediately. I commanded. Kalen's voice came through strained as he hauled heavy shielding plates into position. He explained that he was seeing a fluctuating electromagnetic field that functioned more like a handshake protocol than simple noise. "It's looking for a master core," he said, as he began dropping a Faraday mesh over it to kill the signal. I sat back in the command chair and pulled the log terminal toward me, feeling the weight of the last hour as a physical pressure on my chest. We had just destroyed a mirror of our own history. a 7,000-year-old ghost that looked as though it had been built in the same forges as the Beetle. If that agonizing, conjoined mass of flesh was the result of the noise catching up to a ship, then Earth was not sending explorers, it was sending bait. If that mutation ever touched a human DNA strand and adapted, we would not just be bringing back samples, but an extinction event. I queued for a status report from Doc Silas, who responded that his suit was pressurized and he was in the airlock. I watched the external feed as he vented out on a tether, his mag boots clacking against the scarred Beetle skin hull. He performed a visual sweep of the aft thrusters and the underbelly rail tubes, noting that the heat sink vents were charred from our violent maneuvers, but appeared free of any fleshy hitchhikers. The comms crackled with static for a second, causing me to hover my hand over the coil gun mag lock. Doc reassured me it was nothing more than a scorch mark where the radiation pulse had fried some outer sensor nodes. He moved toward the starboard stabilizer to check the primary LiDAR array, insisting, "We need those eyes clear if we intend to jump." I continued recording the log while my eyes darted between Lyra's scan and the monitor showing Kalen's struggle. We were a tiny spark of heat and metal in a graveyard that had finally gone quiet, for now. Kalen's voice suddenly broke through the internal channel, thick with a mix of academic obsession and genuine dread. "Captain, I've managed to bypass the encryption on the Derelict's black box, or whatever passes for one in this era. It's not just a serial number. The registry is bleeding through the corruption in a dead language, but the phonetic translation is consistent. This ship, it was called the Nezimer." He grunted as he tightened a final bolt, confirming that the resonance with the Nezimer core had dropped by 90%. "We're finally as quiet as human retrofit tech will allow, for the moment," he added, his breathing heavy over the comms. The cockpit remained illuminated in the low amber and teal glow of tactical overlays, with the vibration of the ship's systems serving as the only barrier against the void. I stared at the primary schematic on the blue screen, watching the real-time diagnostic feed. The Beetle 68 was a sensitive beast. Its LiDAR was so finely tuned that I could see the microscopic pitting on the forward hull from the radiation burst. Every sensor node signaled green, but a persistent gut feeling told me otherwise. I muttered for Kalen to keep the box sealed, regardless of his curiosity. If you crack that shell without the Faraday mesh at full strength, we could be inviting something we barely comprehend for an open buffet on 4 unlucky souls, billions of miles away from humanity, I told him. I asked what he was seeing in the metadata, and his voice returned, filtered through the interference of his shielding. Kalen explained that the logs on the Nezimer were a total mess, as if the data itself had been eaten. He described fragments of a sensor log from their final moments where the ship was in a stable cruise 1 second, and the next, the hull was transitioning, as if the metal was being unmade into flesh. He paused, and I heard him tapping on a tablet as he discussed some USF corporate talk regarding anomalous materials found in the belt. He had previously dismissed it as budget justification, but the salvaged shielding module was too elegant to be human. It did not use standard magnetic bottle technology, but a gravitational fold. He concluded that our technological boom was not an invention, but a heist, and that we had been jerry-rigging technology we did not truly understand for decades. I could sense he was thinking of something in the back of his head. I decided not to pry too much for now. Lyra scoffed from the pilot's seat, her eyes fixed on the drift path. She remarked, "We're flying a stolen car we don't know how to drive, which explains why the warp gate back home is acting up. If the noise we made here echoed back to Earth, they might not be able to open the door for us, even if they wanted to." The tight beam from Earth remained on the secondary monitor, a cold reminder of our isolation, mentioning warp gate disturbances and high interference. I ordered Doc to get back inside and help Kalen once the sensors were clear. If the Nezimer was a mirror of our technology, then whatever infected their ship was the same thing that turned their crew into that mess of walking nightmare. We needed that shielding module integrated into the Beetle's hull before we even considered another FTL jump. I looked back at the schematic, acknowledging that while the ship was healthy, we were haunted. Every time a small piece of dust pinged off the hull, the crew flinched. We were a week into the cruise out of the system, and the guilt over at Cen-Prime remained a thick fog in the cabin. We had left them with a plague we could not cure, and turrets that might not be enough to save them. Lyra quietly observed. We're no longer just explorers, we're carriers. I replied that we would not be carriers if we fixed the shielding, though I was looking at the Nesmer core on the feed. It looked like a fossilized heart, barely sparking with dim, dying blue flickers of light. Whatever that organic entity was, it had not just destroyed the ship, but had digested its very purpose. We moved toward the outer rim, our eyes peeled for the slightest shimmer in the black, knowing that if the engineers could not open the gate, we would have to find a way to look for help without calling these sky eaters to our position. After a few days of constant prodding and probing, trying to replicate the modules in the fabricator, the orange glow of the jerry-rigged, shielding module flickers across the cockpit glass. It's a ghostly pulse that ripples down the Beetle's hull before settling into an invisible, low-frequency hum. It is a crude mimicry of the technology found on the Nesmer, a bubble of folded lattice force field barely held together by the ship's auxiliary power. Now it belongs to us. Lyra reports that the shielding has reached 100% stability, her voice carrying a trace of pride through her deep exhaustion. We finally donned armor capable of muffling the ship's acoustic signature, providing enough safety to escape this sector of the space zone. Calen, Silas, and Lyra radiated pride. They had engineered a breakthrough technology, and despite its rugged construction, they were already locked in a heated debate over who should have the honor of naming it. As their commander, watching them bicker brought a profound sense of calm amidst the horrifying nightmare of the void. The real breakthrough, however, is not the shield, but the fractured data Calen pulled from the ancient core. As the 3D map blooms across the primary HUD, the scale of our ignorance becomes a physical weight in the small room. The display reveals thousands of worlds, connected by a complex web of exactly 1,455 zones where the fabric of space is thin, enough for an FTL drive to punch through. Calen whispers, "It's a road," realizing that our warp drives are not just jumping between points, but navigating a pre-existing highway system folded beneath the skin of the universe. We had believed ourselves geniuses for inventing the drive, yet we were merely children finding a hole in a fence we did not build. This data reveals a terrifying truth. The crew of the Nesmer did not build this network either. 7,000 years ago, they were scavengers just like us, stumbling upon a galactic infrastructure that was already ancient when their sun was young. Doc Silas mutters, "We're like fleas on a dog's back," as he stares at the map from the bulkhead. We spent centuries arguing over the moon and Mars without ever scratching the paint on the real galaxy. The architects of these roads were not just advanced, they were designers of the greatest proportion. The realization hits us like a cold front, making our pride in the BEETLE 68 and our status as explorers feel like a children's play. We're using stolen tools to walk through a house built by something we don't even understand or can process, and we have already attracted the vermin living in the walls. I ordered the crew to beam every coordinate and every subspace gap back to Earth. If the USF cannot open the gate from their side, they need to understand that the noise we are making is a violation of a system we do not own, I said. The tight beam pulses out into the black, carrying a map of a galaxy that suddenly feels far too large and crowded. Lyra asks, "Where do these roads lead, and who might still be driving on them?" Her hands hover over the yoke as she studies the gates. I look at the ship's schematic and recognize how small and obsolete we are, yet for the first time, we are no longer drifting aimlessly. We have the map. I stepped up behind Lyra's chair and asked her to talk to me, after she had spent 3 hours staring at the navigation stack. The cockpit remained silent, except for the rhythmic thrum of the shielding module, which has become our new heartbeat. She announced that she found a gate the Nesmer data calls a suture, a subspace bridge that bypasses standard warp corridors. When I asked where it leads, she admitted, "It goes into the deep interior, a sector the USF has not yet named." The gate on the other side of the suture is active and outputting a signal that matches the handshake protocol in the salvaged core. If we cannot get back to Earth because the primary gate is locked, we have no other way but to move forward and dive deeper into the void, she noted. It is a massive gamble, given that the BEETLE 68 is operating on stolen time and retrofitted parts from another civilization. Through the internal monitor, I watched Silas in the greenhouse, moving with clinical, mournful, and reverent grace as he transferred the Cen-Prime samples into fresh nutrient trays. The bioluminescent flora of the Emerald Planet already leans toward the internal lights, serving as a living reminder of the world we left scarred. Silas responded over the comms. The plants are breathing, but they have changed since we destroyed the derelict. They might be cautious of the energy the derelict core is giving out, sir. In the core room, the orange-tinted veil of gravity keeps the noise of our Osiris-7 engine from leaking into the void, maintaining a fragile silence. Kalen confirmed the muffle is holding at 98% efficiency and the radiation leak is contained. He warned, if we take this jump, we need to move fast. The shielding was not designed for the high-pressure drag of a subspace suture. I looked at Lyra as she waited for the order. Behind us, the twin suns were shrinking into distant golden pinpricks, while the gate ahead looked like a shimmering violet tear in the velvet of space. I told her to align the nose, deciding that if the front door to Earth was locked, we would find another way into the house. The Beetle 68 groaned as the FTL engines flared for the final alignment, carrying us toward the unknown with a stolen shield, an ancient map, and a greenhouse plated with alien plants. Lyra's hands remained rock-steady on the manual yokes as she drove the Beetle 68 straight into the violet aperture. The space folded with a thundering jolt, pulling us inside with an intense shudder before quickly stabilizing. The stars did not stretch, but rather snapped into a tunnel of shimmering violet, the entrance to the subspace road. Inside this warp bubble, the ship settled into a strange and heavy stillness. The familiar hum of the Osiris-7 core settled down,